Right, welcome ladies and gentlemen. Apparently, Disney told Pixar to make Inside Out 2 less gay. Oh yes, allegedly so. This is a report courtesy of IGN, where they're sort of discussing Inside Out 2 and just what shambles it was, basically. Like, it's a big expose. And then there's a part of it which is, you know, it sort of delves into LGBTQ plus Pixar staff. They wanted to make characters gay, and Disney told them no. Buzz Lightyear failed because of gayness, and all this kind of stuff, which is fascinating. It's a fascinating read through. It's a peek behind the curtain. So I thought we'd dive into it. Hit subscribe if you're newer, guys. Turn the bell notifications on, and yeah, we'll just take a look. So again, this is on IGN. But yeah, Inside Out 2 was the hit Pixar needed, but the laid off employees who crunched on it are still hurting. Basically, a bunch of fired employees are disgruntled. That doesn't negate what they're saying, but they are disgruntled, which could add, yeah, it could be a motivator for revealing lots of juicy stuff. But we'll have a look, shall we? So, 10 former Pixar employees, not a small amount, 10, talk about the pains of this year's layoffs and the pressure that surrounded Inside Out 2 and larger cultural concerns at the studio. Which is, again, this is all just fascinating stuff, quite frankly. So it says here, from the outside, Pixar's narrative is a clear story of redemption after an undeniably tough few years with COVID-19, Hollywood strikes, and then loads of box office disappointments. The studio needed a win, and that was Inside Out 2. So this is the sequel to Pete Docter's Oscar-winning 2015 blockbuster. That is Pixar's biggest hit in years, and it's not even close. Inside Out 2 isn't just Pixar's highest-grossing film. It's the highest-grossing animated film of all time, sitting at a jaw-dropping 1.6 billion at the worldwide box office, which is great. I mean, that is good. Obviously, adjusted for inflation, slightly different, but okay. So, what's the situation here? Well, many of the workers behind Inside Out 2, its record-shattering success is more than a little bittersweet. As reported earlier this year, the studio began layoffs affecting 175 workers, or 14% of its staff, which is massive. And it says here, not only are laid off employees unable to benefit from a bonus for Inside Out 2's success, some are also recovering from what several sources describe as an unprecedented crunch surrounding Inside Out 2. There is just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore, apparently. So here's some quotes. I think for a month or two, the animators were working 7 days a week. Ridiculous amounts of production workers. Just people being tossed into jobs they'd never really done before. It was horrendous. I would venture that at least 95% of the people that got laid off are financially effed right now, one person says. Huh. So outside of the financial strain of it all, sources also paint a picture of a studio that's terrified to rock the boat, with some internally pushing to avoid LGBTQ themes. That is the right move. Absolutely, it is the right move. If the vast majority of your audience are heterosexual and they are families, it is the right move to avoid catering and pandering to a minority. Now, this isn't to throw out mindless hatred towards homosexuals or anything like that. There's a vast majority of you guys that watch my channel. However, it is not a good business to cater to a minority of individuals. It's a good business practice to cater to the majority of individuals. You know, families are very particular about this stuff. You know, normalization of these things towards their children can be, you know, very off-putting to families. And Disney has quite a large history of agendas, which they're very open about. So it makes sense, actually. Well, I mean, it's surprising, actually, for the studio to be like, yeah, we probably shouldn't do too much of that. Even though they do, and it's very, very clear to see. But it's interesting, you know. It's them sort of staving off the propaganda machine. So, yeah, I think it's smart, to be fair, to not focus too much on those kind of things. You know, we could have one, you know, studio that just doesn't do it. That'd be great. It doesn't have to be in absolutely everything. Just because reasons. Anyway. So yeah, it basically says that with some internally pushing to avoid LGBTQ themes requiring edits to Inside Out 2, it's a studio, they say, that's overly reliant on Chief Creative Officer Pete Docter stubbornly set in its ways and setting its remaining team up for more crunch in its future films. The internal culture of Pixar right now is really tough, one former employee says. There is just an incredible amount of people who are like, I can't do this anymore. Disney obviously didn't. Why would they comment for this? Of course they weren't going to comment. So we'll scroll down a little bit more to some more of the comments here, because this is interesting. So Lightyear was a well-publicised disappointment, closing out its box office with just $226 million worldwide, which it would have had a budget of probably about $200 million anyway. With the next film, Elemental, did end up faring better with nearly $500 million worldwide. It had to rebound from what Pixar president Jim Morris admitted was a disappointing opening of just $29.5 million domestically. And according to one source, due to the profit-sharing model at Disney Pixar, a movie has to cross $600 million to be considered profitable for Pixar. That is insane. That is actually insane. This is interesting. Didn't know this before. And it's not seen as a true hit until that coveted $1 billion mark, which is pretty well known now, generally speaking, that studios want $1 billion. But it's dumb. Really, really dumb to chase that. It all led to a situation where Inside Out 2, a sequel to arguably one of the most beloved animated movies ever, was seen as the film that could reverse the studio's fortunes, making it one source called an all-hands-on-deck studio emergency. It was rare, we're told, to find someone who worked at Pixar in the past couple of years who didn't contribute to Inside Out 2. One source points out that the credits for Inside Out 2 are longer than any other Pixar movie given the amount of studio workers who were pulled in on it. Even now, I think people are gone, still feeling that pressure of like, oh my god, we did it, we did it. Okay then. So let's take a look at this. Some of this is interesting. So some go as far as to say they believe Pixar would fall apart if Inside Out 2 wasn't a runaway success. It was seen by many employees as a life or death situation for the studio. Quote, that was the pressure felt by everybody. We need this movie to succeed because we won't have a studio otherwise. And that is the pressure that everybody felt the whole time. The whole time. Even now, I think people are gone, still feeling that pressure. Like, oh my god, we did it, we did it. So whether or not Pixar was actually in danger isn't confirmed, but in a Time interview just before the release of Inside Out 2, Doctor said, if this doesn't do well at the theatre, I think it just means we're going to have to think even more radically about how we run our business. So yeah, probably. Anyway, here's some interesting stuff. While Doctor is publicly an executive producer on Inside Out 2, multiple sources say that he stepped in as uncredited co-director. Working heavily alongside credited director Kelsey Mann, in some ways, that move made sense to many. Doctor, after all, co-wrote and directed the first Inside Out, in addition to boasting, directing and story credits on beloved Pixar movies like Up, WALL-E and Toy Story. So here's one quote. I mean, you saw the end result. Inside Out 2 made $1 billion at the box office. That was a direct result of Pete's involvement. Pete's a genius. Nobody can dispute this. Which is true, I guess. Which is fine. But they say this. In fact, many of the sources IGN spoke to generally don't have particularly negative feelings towards Doctor, which is great. One source does say that the studio leans on Doctor to an unhealthy degree. And it's partially what leads to a situation like the crunch on Inside Out 2. You cannot do anything without Pete. Literally nothing. And that creates a bottleneck. Which is true. I mean, that would do that. But yeah, okay. Wow. Let's have a look at this. That brief period of willingness to experiment, however, didn't last. Particularly after Lightyear's financial failure. Sources say Pixar lost the desire to take risks, either in its creative appointments or in its story decisions. As reported at the time, there were many reasons why Lightyear disappointed at the box office. A confusing spin-off concept, a new voice for Buzz, growing pains in going from Disney Plus back to theatrical. Doctor even admitted that it prompted a lot of soul-searching at the studio, citing some of Lightyear's conceptual and character issues. But multiple sources say that Disney leadership internally put a large part of the blame for Lightyear's financial failure on a same-sex kiss in the film, which was briefly removed, then reinstated after an internal staff uproar. In a joint statement to Walt Disney Company leadership, LGBTQ workers and allies at Pixar said leadership was censoring overtly gay affection at a time where employees were also protesting the company's response to the Don't Say Gay bill. That is the right thing to do. Just generally speaking, it is the right thing to do to not show overt levels of homosexual affection in kids' films. That's just, I hate to break it to you, pandering to a minority of individuals doesn't lead to financial success, especially when it comes to families. I know this will upset some people, but you can't deny that. You just can't. So, but also, just as an FYI, Lightyear did not fail because of that kiss. Lightyear failed for many reasons. It wasn't just because of that. That's a contributing factor, but it's like the teeniest, tiniest piece of that puzzle. So it says this: it is, as far as I know, still a thing where leadership, they'll bring up Lightyear specifically and say, oh, Lightyear was a financial failure because it had a queer kiss in it. One source tells IGN. That's not the reason the movie failed. No, it's not. It's not. But equally so, it didn't help. So now, Doctor largely uses the language of making universal stories, which to him means something that's very homogenous that anyone can relate to. Yeah, good. That needs to be like that. Yeah, that's right. That is actually the right thing to do. So the apparent hesitance to touch on LGBTQ themes, storylines in particular, affected Inside Out 2's development. According to several of our sources, multiple people recall hearing about continuous notes to make Riley, the main character of both Inside Out movies, come across as less gay, leading to numerous edits that ramped up around September. After the resolution of the WGA strike, sources describe rumours that there was special care put into making the relationship between Riley and Val, a supporting character introduced in Inside Out 2, seem as platonic as possible, even requiring edits to the lighting and tone of certain scenes to remove any trace of romantic chemistry. That's not a bad thing to do, and it was hugely successful. Now, does it mean that having that in the film would have led to less financial, sort of kickback? Who knows? But clearly it didn't really harm it. It's a smash hit for Pixar. So, yeah, one source describes it as just doing a lot of extra work to make sure that no one would potentially see them as not straight. But you literally wrote them as not straight. Like, very clearly you wrote them as not straight. Right? Like, that's very clear from anyone with a brain. Obviously. It's worth noting that Pixar released a short in 2015 that followed Riley's first date with a boy. Still, many fans online started to call out queer coding in Inside Out 2 from the moment the first trailer arrived. Inside Out 2... so the movie also teased a deep dark secret that Riley was harbouring throughout, only to reveal in the post-credits that the secret was that she once burned a hole in the carpet. Many fans, however, thought the reveal would be that Riley was actually grappling with her sexuality. Ah yes, just what I need in a children's film, for fuck's sake. Mind you, Riley is not canonically gay, one source says. In the film, what you saw, nothing about Riley says that she's gay, but it is kind of inferred based on certain contexts, and that is something that they try to play down at multiple points. Again, that's not a bad thing to do. So another source calls some leadership uncomfortable with queer themes at large, and the insistence on keeping those themes out of Inside Out 2 was a big thing throughout. All of this, the pressure, creative bottlenecks, led to a rush. Anyway, what else is there really to say about this? It's interesting. They're talking about this. You're just working 24/7. They were doing a hell of a lot of crunch for this, but there's not a hell of a lot else here really to talk about. It's interesting. It is interesting to see. Again, these are disgruntled people. Obviously. The day that the layoffs happened was like a funeral. There was weeping and crying in the atrium. Yeah, look, I'm sure it sucked. Like, I do genuinely. I'm sure it sucked. But, hey, Lightyear did not fail because it was gay. There was anything gay in it. It failed just because it was dog shit. Inside Out 2 wasn't hugely successful because it didn't have anything gay in it. But it was also successful to a degree because those things were toned down. If those things were in it, it would have been a detriment to it to a degree, unequivocally so. So there you go. I thought this would be interesting. What do you guys think? Again, don't mean to offend anyone. This is not a bigoted statement. It's just an analysis of financials and business as a whole. You can't keep catering to a minority of individuals and expect the majority to buy wholesale your product. It's not how things work. And kids, families don't want their kids to watch this kind of stuff. Generally speaking, they just generally don't. If you give people the option, to ask these things in private, whether you would or you wouldn't, they'd probably say no. Anyway, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so drop it down below. Cheers, guys. Take care. Bye-bye now.